Geeks and geekettes, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back for another thrill packed, information loaded, data crammed issue of Ask Chuck Dixon, where you get to ask me questions about what I do for a living. And what I do for a living is I write comic books. Let's not waste another second of your precious time. Brick Hard Slab is back. And with this question, when you write your Conan stories, comics, do you lean into the barbarian aspect of his childhood or the slave movie aspect? I've read both your books, but none of your comics, which needs to be remedied. Of the two, which do you find more compelling and I hope closer to Howard's Conan? Just my 2 cents, but Howard stressed the conflict between the barbarian and civilized to change his vision without changing the character and nature of the stories themselves. Yeah, I mean, Conan in a Conan story, um, he has no character arc, and that's on purpose. Howard wrote a character, created an iconic barbarian character who's doesn't learn any lessons, doesn't change, doesn't modify his worldview. He grew up rough. I don't quite understand what you mean. Do I lean more toward his childhood or his experiences as a slave? Um, Conan would have put his experiences as a slave behind him. I don't share. I don't. The movie version to me, that version of Conan's origin, I'm not buying that. Okay, that's not Howard's story for Conan because he had enough stories of Conan as a younger man, as a thief. Conan was not a slave from adolescence to adulthood. I didn't see that happening. But Conan, the era. Well, everybody in Conan's era, except for the very very wealthy or entitled, lived a rough childhood, and Conan's is particularly rough. Howard doesn't tell you a whole lot about Conan as a young man, but when we meet Conan, he is who he is. He's driven by his desires and his vision of the world, which is I'm going to get what's mine, and no one's going to stand in my way, and no man's going to define me. And Howard occasionally plays with Conan's moral compass. In particular, my favorite story. Um, um, yeah, the Jewels of Gwalar. The title of my favorite Conan story escaped me for a moment. Uh, so the Jewels of Gwalar, where Conan has to make a decision between, saving a person or saving a treasure, and it's really the only time in any of the Conan stories we learn anything about Conan's inner workings, where his worldview is challenged or his desires are challenged. Um, but that's what we like about Conan. He has every negative male stereotype. All he thinks about is today and tomorrow. I'm going to do something today that's going to earn me enough, gold or favor to get what I want tomorrow, which is, booze and women. So that's Conan in a nutshell. He just sort of moves through life. He has goals, but no deadlines. so, and he's just a very fatalistic guy. He's just going to live this way till he meets a guy stronger than him, which fortunately for us never happens in the stories. And so, yeah, I just lean into that. The Conan is the perfect character because, even for new readers, it's easy to quickly establish who he is very early on in the story. Within our first encounter with Conan, we know everything we need to know about him. And then what has to happen, and what Howard did every time, is come up with a really terrific story and then stick Conan in it. I mean, Howard never wrote stories about Conan. He wrote stories that had Conan in them. And there's a great difference there. And it's something I preach all the time. Don't write a story about your character. Character driven stories are fine for women to watch. but men want an actual story, and women want an actual story as well. And I'm just joking there. So your story can, you know, be a lot about the character or the character's arc or whatever, but it also needs to be a good story. You need the plot. Character-driven stories are not an excuse to avoid plotting. You need a story. And Conan, you know, like so many other characters, you know, so many other classic genre characters, is perfect for this. You come up with a great story and then insert your character into it, put him in motion. And that's what I did. You know, I hewed as close to Howard in his language, in his prose style, and his idea of what made a good story as I could in the 3 novels that I wrote. So, and I promise all of you keep asking, when's the 3rd novel coming out? Titan is going to release these in new editions, all 3 books, but I don't know when. I have no idea. I don't know when it's scheduled or anything else. So there you go. RMK. I was wondering what your thoughts are about the way Superman has been depicted over the last few decades prominently, but not exclusively in comics. I'm specifically referring to the way he went from a helping hand exemplar to universalist utopian messiah with a lot of way off Jesus comparisons and allusions. It's always really irked me as both a fan and a Christian. Did you ever notice this shift? And if so, when do you think it started? Or was it always there, unspoken and under the surface? Since you've mentioned in the past that Denny O'Neil kept a tight rein on the way Batman was depicted, it makes me wonder whether there was any editorial shift or bullpen collaboration that permitted the same with Superman. I really stopped reading Superman comics in the 90s. You know, I followed the stuff that Roger Stern and Jerry Ordway and especially Dan Jurgens were doing. I really loved all that stuff, still do. But I kind of lost track of all of it after the 90s. Apparently in the 2000s, when the DC editorial shifted to what I call the indifferent crowd of editors, they sort of let their writers run wild, and the writers sort of elevated Superman and Batman to godhood. And to me, that's just kind of uninteresting. That's not, you know, I don't want to view Superman as a messiah. The most interesting thing about Superman is his humanity, because he is not human. We have to assume his genetics, almost everything about him, is different than us. And yet, you know, because he landed where he landed and was adopted by the Kents and everything else, and they instilled in him these Midwest Christian values, he grew up to be the man he was. But his greatest desire, he's very much aware that he is a visitor from a strange world. He is not human, and he does everything he can to be human. Even though he has godlike powers, he has these scary, crazy superpowers, but he doesn't want to be. That's not the most important thing for him. He will use them in service to his fellow man, but not to save humanity or to be looked upon as better than other men. He wishes to be regarded as a guy. He wants to be. He seeks more respect as Clark Kent than he does as Superman. Because get respect as Superman's easy. You know, you lift an aircraft carrier in the air once, and everybody thinks you're fantastic. You know, Clark Kent's got to work every day to prove himself, to prove worthy of his position as a reporter. And that's the great thing. But if you portray Superman as this infallible being who can solve any problem with a punch, or by flying really fast, you've taken everything away from the character. You have to create stories, and the best writers on Superman did this. You have to create stories that challenge Superman's intellect as well as his brawn, challenge his character as well as his superpowers. We don't want Superman stories to just be slugfest. I mean, I love the slugfest with giant robots and whatever. Um, but we really want to see that human side, and we really want to see Superman put in a corner that he has to get out of. And the best Superman stories has him thinking his way out of those things. But it's a tall order. It's Superman presents a challenge to most Superman writers, and a lot of them aren't up to it. To come up with compelling, engaging stories that don't break the mold or violate the formula, or in any other way diminish Superman as a character, or simply rely on his godlike powers to drive the stories. It takes a lot more than that. It's an extremely nuanced character, and a lot of writers don't seem to understand that. But the best ones did, and there was lots of great Superman stories going all the way back from the '90s all the way back through the early '60s, '50s, '40s. There's terrific Superman stories. He's a tremendous character. Joshua Ignatowski, welcome back. Welcome home. When creating wants and fears for characters, how do you come up with deep and meaningful ones for them to have? Well, they have to be ones that anyone can relate to. That we share some degree of experience with these characters, be it unrequited love or failure at something. And I think the word exemplar was used recently. The exemplar of this is Charlie Brown. Charlie Brown he is a work of genius. For 50 years, Charles Schulz remained consistent with this character, constantly exploring this guy. And we love Charlie Brown. We feel bad for Charlie Brown. We pity Charlie Brown. But mostly, we realize we are all Charlie Brown. He has his wants and desires are to be well regarded, not even well liked or loved. He just wants to be well regarded. This guy just wants a few wins. He wants to finally kick that frickin' football. He wants to finally win a baseball game. He wants to get that kite in the air and just have an afternoon flying a kite. But it never works out for this guy. And that's why we love him, because we've all been there. We've all faced failure and disappointment and disruption to our lives and lost opportunities. And that's why we love this character. And he's a perfect example of how you make a character relatable by what they desire, because he wants the same things that we want. Now, your character's desires can shift. And I'm going to give you two excellent examples. In the movie Aliens, we're introduced to Ripley. She's down on her luck. She's unemployed. Nobody's going to hire her. Nobody believes that story about a xenomorph. And the people that do believe it don't want anybody to know about it. So nobody's going to ever hire her to crew on a ship again. So she's working for nickels and dimes in her crappy little plastic apartment. And this opportunity comes along to make some money, to go to a planet where there are xenomorphs. Now, she doesn't want to do this, okay? So her wants right now are shallow, okay? She just wants out of that apartment, okay? She just wants to make enough cash to live at least a halfway decent life. And boy, she does not want to go to that planet. But what choice does she have? So here you have a character with very shallow wants. And if that was the case throughout the movie, her character would not have been compelling at all. We wouldn't have really cared that. We love Ripley, a fantastic character, but really wouldn't. It would have felt like a sequel. It would have felt like, they went down to the well too often. But they cleverly set up at the beginning of the story, and it doesn't even seem like a setup, that she had a daughter. But because she was in hypersleep so long, her daughter aged and died by the time Ripley was woken up. And that doesn't seem like a setup, because it seems to have been added to the story to ratchet up the tragedy for this character, of the loss. I mean, she's in a world where she doesn't know anybody. Everybody she knows is dead, because she's, basically woken up in the future, her own future. And that scene works to crank up that tragedy. And we don't know when we're watching it that that's an important plot point. Later, when they get to planet whatever, she runs across Newt, this refugee, this last survivor of a xenomorph massacre, this little girl, surviving by her wits alone in these labyrinth of tunnels and things like that. And of course, Ripley latches onto her immediately because Ripley's feeling the loss of this daughter that she barely knew, this daughter whose whole life passed with her absent. And she's feeling that loss, and she latches onto Newt. And now her desire is to survive, not just for herself. That's a shallow survival. She wants her and Newt to survive. She wants to save Newt from the xenomorphs and get the freak off of this planet and never come back again, never see another xenomorph as long as she lives. And that's where her desires build. But see, her desires changed. Her desires deepened. They became richer, more relatable, and now the movie has heart. And now there's something real at stake. It's not just a slasher film where, we just wait to see who this next person to die is. We're like rooting for Ripley. We're worried for Newt. And it makes the whole thing a much richer experience. An even better example of that is a movie called The Lady Eve. It's a Preston Sturges comedy, late 30s, I think 39, maybe 40. I'm not sure. I talk about this movie a lot. You really need to see this movie. If you're interested in storytelling at all, if you're interested in character arcs, if you're interested in what I'm talking about, you need to see this movie. Because in this movie, Barbara Stanwyck plays, she's a con artist. She's a woman who, flim-flams wealthy guys out of money. And she runs into the perfect patsy, Henry Fonda. Henry Fonda played a lot of like affable dopes in screwball comedies, and nobody did it better than Henry Fonda. He's just playing a dopey, lovable goofball, and being funny without even seeming to try to be funny. Fonda was a master at this, and we all remember Fonda as a deep, dramatic actor, heavy dramatic actor, but he was really, really adept at comedy. Now Stanwyck is trying to flim-flam him out of money. So when the movie begins, her first desire is to fleece him for every cent of cash she can. But then her wants change because she falls in love with the dope. There's something about him he really connects, and we fall in love with him, and we fall in love with her. Which, as I've said over and over again, a romance in a movie or a story won't work unless we already love both characters. And we love both of them. We relate to both of them in much different ways. So she falls for the dope. So her wants and desires change from wanting to steal all his money to wanting to marry him, to be with him. But something happens, and her identity as a con woman is revealed, and he's rescued from being fleeced, even though she wasn't going to fleece him now. She's changed her mind. She's changed her wants and desires. And so he basically escapes her clutches. Well, love turns to hate. Now she hates him. She hates him because he put her down. He saw her for what he thought she was. And she's not thinking about redeeming herself or anything else. She's thinking about revenge. She hates this guy. She fell in love with him. She opened up to him. For once in her life, she was real to someone, and they spurned her. And she's going to get him good. And the last third of the movie, remember, this is a comedy. The last third of the movie is her out to get him once more and really fleece him. Not just take him for what's in his wallet, not just take him for what's in his checkbook, but take him for everything. She's going to just take this guy to the cleaners and leave him destitute. So now her wants and desires have changed 3 times. And of course, it's a romantic screwball comedy. So by the end of the film, she's in love with him again. So her wants and desires change for a 4th time in the movie. And it's all done so adroitly, so adeptly, so skillfully. Preston Sturges was a master filmmaker. He both wrote and directed this movie. And it's a rewarding film on so many levels. I watched it so many times. If you haven't seen it, I really urge you to find this movie and watch it if you are at all interested in storytelling or character development, because It's an excellent example. Twin spin, of course, of course. Mr. Ignatowski gets himself a twin spin. Okay, Joshua's back with how far would you say your writing speed has improved over the course of your career and when you started? Um, I've always been fast. I thought that writers had to write fast. I would see writers in movies, newspaper reporters and novelists, and they're tapping away, tap, 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 all day long, just racing to get that story, a copy boy right at their elbow, ready to take that copy down to the typesetters. And I thought that's the way you do it. I also saw Stan Lee. Stan Lee seemed to write half or more of the comics I was reading. And I didn't know a lot about credits when I was a kid. So Stan Lee's name appeared anywhere in the credits. I assumed he wrote it, even if his brother Larry wrote it. So, so I thought, wow, that must be how fast you write. Of course, Stan Lee wrote extraordinarily fast, but I didn't know he was writing primarily dialogue. So, so I just thought that was the speed. And of course, if you want to make money, unless you're hit the big time with a couple of huge bestsellers and a big movie deal and all the rest of it, you got to work your ass off, especially if you're in genre fiction. If you're writing paperback originals, or back in the day, writing paperback originals or writing comics, you had to crank the material out to make any money. And especially back when there were no royalties. But even when the royalties came in, there were royalties starting in the 80s. You just sort of didn't think about them. You just kept thinking about the page rate. I wrote X amount of pages this month. I'm going to get X amount of money. The royalty check would come in, and that's gravy. Just put that aside. Forget about that. I don't want to know about that money. Just put it in the bank and forget about it. So yeah, I've always been fast. Even when I did children's books, my turnaround time was pretty amazing. If I met with children's book editors and they gave me an assignment, I was back the next week with a finished script, which they told me was unusual. Usually their writers would disappear for months. I'm currently co-writing a screenplay, and we've promised the producers that we would have it to them in 2.5 months, and it looks like we're going to have it within 30 days because it's just going fast. And I'm I don't know if my co-writer's listening, but I'm as always, I'm kind of goosing him. But because he's better at screenwriting than I am, I can't get ahead of him. I usually always get ahead of my current co-writer. So much so that often projects we were meant to write together, I just end up writing them myself because he can't catch up. So and the thing is, my writing speed continues to be fast. Prose is slower. It's always going to be slower for me. But comics, yeah, I can write comics as fast now as I ever did. I can write. I don't want to. I don't want to sit and I don't want to write 20 pages in a day. I don't have to. I aim for 8 a day if I'm writing comics. If I can get past that, if things are going well, I do that. But yeah, my speed's always been pretty good. Pretty amazing for a guy who can't type. Kane Dorr, are you considering writing novels in any genre you've yet to attempt, such as detective? I play around with ideas for detective series mostly, and it would be character driven, and that's where I fall down on the mystery detective genre. I think of these great ideas for continuing detective series, but then you got to come up with the mysteries to go with them, and I'm not really good at that. I mean, I can do it, but it takes me a long time to work them out. And usually, when I've had to write mysteries, it's been because my way of writing a mystery is I have some arcane scientific or historical knowledge, something that I found out, and that's the MacGuffin in the story or the solution to the mystery, and I sort of work backwards from there. But if I'm tasked with writing a mystery and I don't have one of them currently in my head, I can't do it. My hat is off to anybody who can write whodunits. I mean, they are very hard to write. You write good ones anyway. I mean, there's lots of crappy ones out there, but I don't really like Agatha Christie novels because I find them kind of dry. But I do appreciate how she sets things up. I mean, she was a master. I don't know. I'm saying Agatha Christie was a master at mysteries. Like that's some startling news everybody needs to hear. But things like Ellery Queen and things like that, I'm like, boy, I can't do this. I couldn't do this. This is too challenging. The closest, um, the closest I've come to a whodunit mystery really was Who Was It mystery, which was the Iron Ghost. In the Iron Ghost, it's a masked vigilante in the final days of the Third Reich, and we don't know who the masked vigilante is. I sort of turned that whole thing on its head, where we don't know who it is, and there's 5 male characters in the story that it could, or even the female character. There's 5 characters in the story that it could be, and the mystery is which one of them is the Iron Ghost. And that was fun. That was fun, but it wasn't like a whodunit. Plus, it was a comic book, and the demands on a mystery in a comic book aren't the same as the demands on a mystery in a novel. And so, yeah, detective fiction, I admire it, but I've stayed out of it. Other genres, I mean, I don't really have any desire to write a straight up romance novel. I would like to write historical adventure and plan to. I've got a few ideas for straight up historical fiction novels, but I got to take the time to research and everything else. And Bad Times doesn't count because Bad Times was my way of doing historical fiction as seen by the eyes of modern people. So they were witnesses to history, not so much participants in history. So I could avoid language and proper terms for things like that. I could avoid all of that, but still write about the Franco-Prussian War. So, and I can't think of, as far as prose fiction, military sci-fi, space opera, stuff like that. I don't see myself writing a hard science fiction novel. I did Winter World, post-apocalyptic, but there's not a lot of science there. The world gets frozen over. Everybody has to survive. I don't see myself writing anything like that. So hopefully that answers your question. Although I'd like to write a romance comic someday, just to say I've done it. Kane Door again. Do you read detective novels? If so, which are your favorites? Well, Sherlock Holmes. I read Sherlock Holmes when I was a kid. I read all of them. I love them. So that sort of got me into it. But back then all the boys read Sherlock Holmes. It seems weird now because I don't think any kids are reading, or very few are reading Sherlock Holmes. But at our school library, Sherlock Holmes, it was on a waiting list. They had a couple of volumes of the Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, The Return of Sherlock Holmes, and there was always a waiting list for them. So bygone era. But from Holmes, I moved right into the gutter with Mickey Spillane. I read all the Mike Hammers, and I love them. I was right at that right age, 14, 15, hormones raging. This guy spoke to me. Mike Hammer, the Neanderthal detective, and the mysteries. A friend of mine, he's a lot smarter than me. He would always borrow my books, and I give him I was reading a lot back then. I give him a pile of books on Monday to return it on Friday. He read them all, and I remember his mom giving him a hard time because he's reading. Well, you're reading that trash, and he told me one time he read one backwards, and he said the mystery doesn't work. He says I read it backwards. I read from the final chapter to the first chapter to see how he set things up, and he goes, he wasn't a good whodunit mystery writer. The mystery doesn't work. I was like, I don't care. I just want to see Hammer gunning people down with his 45s. And from Spillane, I moved on to Dashiell Hammett. Hammett was an actual private investigator for the Pinkerton Agency, had lots of experience. And he resigned to become a pulp detective writer, but went on to be, I think, the greatest American crime writer ever because he based all these things on his own experiences. Maltese Falcon, The Thin Man, Red Harvest. These are all classics. He was not prolific. He didn't write for a long time. He got a case of writer's block that lasted for the rest of his life. And probably due to alcohol, probably due to hanging out with Lillian Hellman. That would give anybody writer's block and cause anybody to drink. But fantastic stories with real authenticity. And unlike most of the mystery stories of that period, a real sense of meanness and brutality. Hammett saw some ugly stuff as a Pinkerton detective, and it really comes out in these stories, in everything he writes. If you watch the Thin Man movies, Hammett was advisor on them. And the Thin Man movies, they're, once over lightly mystery comedy films. But at the heart of them, crimes are brutal. The crimes are mean. There's this real sense of danger lurking just outside the world of Nick and Nora. And that's all Dashiell Hammett. They did lots of crime comedy, team up movies in the 30s and 40s, but none of them had that feeling of true danger to the main characters that Hammett's stories did, because of his involvement in making the movies and his advice on how to do things. And because he was such a powerful pop figure and powerful literary figure by this time, no longer a pulp writer, but now seen as an American classic, literati, they listened to him, and much to their benefit. Another guy, I know I'm going off on tangents on each of these authors, but this is how much I love them. Another guy is Chandler. Chandler is the opposite of Hammett. Where Hammett meticulously plotted all of his stories, Chandler writes character driven. Chandler didn't give a damn about plot. His mysteries don't work. Famously, when they were making the movie version of The Big Sleep, Howard Hawks called Chandler to say, "Who killed the chauffeur? We can't figure out who killed the chauffeur." And Chandler said, "Well, I don't know." So he didn't even figure it out. What keeps Chandler's Philip Marlowe stories moving is the writing. It's muscular and clever and arch. The dialogue is priceless. There's laugh out loud lines throughout. Chandler invented that private eye genre of the wild analogies and metaphors used by the detective narrating the story. He had a face like a collapsed lung. She had a figure that would make a bishop kick out a stained glass window. I mean, that's priceless stuff. If you want me, I'll be upstairs cleaning my gun. When General Sternwood asked Philip Marlowe if he's met one of his daughters, he says, "Yeah, she tried to sit on my lap and I was standing up." I mean, that stuff's great. That stuff's so great. And every writer that came after him to try to ape that genre, they owe everything to Chandler. That's just brilliant stuff. And so, yeah, I read all of them, and I've reread Big Sleep and Farewell, My Lovely over and over again. And he was brazen in his lack of plotting. If you've ever read, oh my God, what is it? The Long Goodbye. It literally is a long goodbye. The novel seems to end halfway through, and then we're into what seems to be a denouement. Like he's just like petering away. And then we find out there's more story. I mean, that's just brazen. What writer does that? It's just like, who gives a damn? Maybe it was all the alcohol. These guys drank a lot. Maybe when they Spillane it. Spillane never drank. He was raised at a bar. His dad owned a bar. Never drank, even though he did beer commercials. That was a tangent on top of a tangent. So anyway, yeah, Chandler. Can't go wrong. Absolutely can't go wrong with Chandler. And he was a great screenwriter. He wrote the screenplay for Strangers on a Train, the Hitchcock classic, among a few others that he worked on when he was sober. Ed McBain. I moved on to Ed McBain, and Ed McBain became an obsession. He wrote, I don't know how many, dozens and dozens of these 87th Precinct novels. I think he wrote 2 a year for like the longest time. And I read all of them, and I caught up with all the early ones from the 50s, and then anxiously awaited the release of each new one. And Ed McBain introduced me to the police procedural. Actually, he didn't introduce me to the police procedural novel, but he was a master at the police procedural mystery. The police procedural mystery is what it sounds like. It's the cops solving a crime using, forensics and detection and evidence and canvassing witnesses and interrogations and informants and all the other things the cops use to solve crimes. And McBain created this cast of unforgettable, indelible cop characters. And there's a lot of humor in these stories. There's a lot of grisly stuff in these stories, and a lot of examination of the human nature. And I said that Ed McBain didn't introduce me to police procedural. It was actually the writers whose names I will not try to pronounce, of the Martin Beck mysteries. The Martin Beck mysteries from Sweden. Um, I discovered them before I discovered Ed McBain. And in fact, it was critics' comparisons of the Martin Beck novels to Ed McBain novels which led me to them. But the Martin Beck novels are amazing too. Police procedural novels set in Stockholm, Sweden, and just brilliant, and been made into a number of movies and TV series and the rest of it. And that's good stuff too. I think I got one more. Yeah, there's a guy. The guy actually lives in my neighborhood. I've never run into him. I've run into people who've run into him. Oh, you write too? His name is James Swain. He's still writing, and he writes stories set in the world of gambling. And his lead character, Jimmy Valentine, is a former New York cop who's retired and now works freelance as an investigator for the casinos. And all of the stories are set around that world, and they're terrific. They are terrific stories, and there's a lot of great character stuff because Jimmy has this ne'er-do-well son. It's always getting both of them in trouble, but there's a lot of inside stuff about cheating on cards, cheating slot machines, Ponzi schemes, money laundering, all the stuff. And of course, there's always the convenient murder to draw Jimmy into the story. But Jimmy basically, he lives in Palm Harbor, which isn't that far from me, and I assume James Swain lives there as well because the way he writes about it is like, yeah, that's Palm Harbor. And Jimmy Valentine, he lives in a modest home over there in Palm Harbor, and he receives tapes in the mail from the casinos, and they ask him, look at these tapes, these surveillance tapes, and tell us how this guy's cheating. And that stuff just fascinates the hell out of me. And he writes with real authority because apparently he was involved in this world, and he knows all about casino security and stuff like that. And they're really good. They're really fun page turner novels in which you actually learn something. Maybe not anything useful. You certainly learn you don't want to cheat the casinos. That's trouble. It's trouble, my friend. They want to see you outside. And it's not a good thing. Rex Moss. Because I listen, I do not know how to spell your imaginary South American country, B. Verde. Something green? Basque? A green group of people in Spain who do not speak Spanish? It is Basque Verde. It is Bosqueverde. Now remember, when I told this story about how the name of Bosque Verde, this fictional country that in my universe has been visited by The Simpsons, Batman, The Punisher, SpongeBob, and I'm sure characters in the Rippaverse will be traveling there soon. The name was invented by my brother-in-law. I was living at my sister's horse ranch at the time, horse farm. I keep calling it a ranch. It was in Pennsylvania. There's no ranches in Pennsylvania. I was living on our horse farm, and my brother-in-law and I were sharing breakfast. And I told him I have to come up with a fictional name for a country. I was writing Airboy at the time. Just starting writing Airboy, very beginning. And he just blurted out, "What about Bosque Verde?" And I'm like, damn, that sounds believable. I don't know what it means. It probably doesn't mean anything. But it sounds like a real place. And it's hard to come up with stuff, people names, places named that sound real, that don't stick out as, hey, you made that up. Bosque Verde sounds like you'd want to, hey, I'm going to look that up on the map. You're not going to find it. Or maybe you do. I'm going to Google search Bosque Verde, see if there's actually a place called that. But my brother-in-law had never been there. He just made it up out of his own head. Thanks, Ron. Kieran Brunkard. When you are writing a story, how do you make sure that you are neither overworking or lazy? How do you get your best ideas out? Is writer's block a real thing? Those are 3 questions, but I'm going to let you have them. How do I know I'm done? That's really tough for a writer. I'm basically never done. Even when I'm finished writing for the day, I'm thinking about what I wrote, thinking about what I'm going to write next, thinking about my next assignment. This crap just floats free form in my head. these characters I've created, these characters I write, they live in my head and they're in motion constantly. And in any other, I mean, if I wasn't writing about these characters and thinking the way I do about them, I'd be a schizophrenic. So maybe I'm a high functioning schizophrenic. So, it's never done, and a writer never ends the day thinking I've done enough. They always think I should have done a little more. But as I've said before, best advice I ever got from a writer was don't write down your last idea of the day, because then the next day you know where you're going to begin. So there's none of this warming up, revving up. How am I going to start this? You know what you're going to write, and you've been thinking about it all night long and all morning long. Yeah, I know what I'm going to do. I got it figured out. I know what I'm going to write. I know exactly. When I sit down, these words are going to come out. Never come out the way you thought they did, but they're going to come out. So, yeah, you never feel like you're done, but you have to draw a line somewhere. You know, dinner's waiting. The family would like to see your face. There's trash to be taken out. There's animals to be fed. There's a reason to stop writing. And some days some days I literally feel like I wish I could have done more. I really didn't get enough done today. 1,000-word days on a novel, they're not good days. That's not a good day. But you gotta get up and move around sometime. The other one you asked, and I forgot what that was. How do you get your best ideas out? You just go with that idea. I always say that writing is a mixture of ignorance and confidence. If you think it's a good idea, you go with your Jeopardy answer and you just lean into that and just lean into it hard so that if it's believable to you, it's believable to the reader. Now, let me remind myself of your final question here. Is writer's block a real thing? Not for me. You can talk yourself in the writer's block. I mentioned Dashiell Hammett earlier. He wrote brilliant best-selling crime novels, and then just stopped. He advised for the movies. He contributed to the scripts for a comic strip, Secret Agent X9, but beyond that, didn't do any writing. Occasional short story, and it was due to alcohol. And I blame Lillian Hellman. I think Lillian Hellman was in her mind, a literary wannabe, in the same way that Elizabeth Warren is an American Indian. She wanted to be, with the jet set, the top writers at the time, be seen as an equal to them, and so her and Hammett hung out with a crowd of people who were seen as American literary lions, and I really think that she looked down upon Hammett because he came from the pulps, and she sort of, if you've ever seen a couple that does this, it's just these toxic couples where one or the other will use their significant other as a punching bag or a punchline to a joke. And I really think, I don't know, but I'm just thinking, given what a mean harpy Lillian Hellman was, that Hammett had to suffer through some of that stuff. Why he stuck with her, I'll never know. But he had his other problems, drinking, which I'm sure she brought on more of, and he also had tuberculosis, which might be the real reason he quit the Pinkertons. He does not give that as the reason why he quit the Pinkertons. But writer's block, you can talk yourself into it, and I've never had it. Sure, you get stuck. Like, I can't think of a place name, or I'm not quite sure how to get this guy out of this trap, or I'm not sure how to segue into this next scene. That's not writer's block. You just get up, walk around a little bit, go do something else, go for a walk, go to the movies, go pet the cat, do something else, get on the elliptical, and forget about this. Try to forget about the story for a while, and it'll come to you. If you're a professional writer, you learn early on. If you have any kind of career, that you got to stop worrying at the beginning. It'll come. And if it doesn't, you're not a professional writer. You should get another job. If it's going to be a struggle for you every single time, maybe you only had one book in you. I'm looking at you, Joseph Heller. Maybe maybe that was it, and you need to go do something else. But if you're a professional genre writer like I am, where you're just taking assignments, here, write this, story about Bart Simpson. Here, write this, Alien Legion story. Um, you can't have writer's block. It's got to get done. The other cure for writer's block is staying way ahead of schedule. When you're on a roll, stay on that roll. If you're writing away, if you're having a 5,000 word day, roll with it, baby, because that might not come again for a while. And just go with it. And if you have an assignment and it's due in a month, get it done in a week, and then move on to the next one and stay way ahead of schedule so that you never have a deadline looming over you that might bring on writer's block, because now you've got stress. Your writing has to be not only capable, it has to be done quickly. And that could bring on writer's block. And it's certainly going to bring on you not doing your best work. So there you go. Boom, boom, boom. Oh, Kieran Drunkard. Kieran Drunkard, you must get that all the time, you poor man. Kieran Drunkard, when you are writing a story, how do you make sure that you are neither overworking? You already answered that question, dummy. Let's move on. You almost missed the fact that Kieran earned himself a twin spin. All right, Kieran, I'm just messing up on you all over the place here. Okay, Kieran is back again with, what do you think of young superheroes? What when you were a kid, was the Teen Titans during the Silver Age and Bronze Age popular? Yeah, well, they were Bronze Age even more popular. I read Teen Titans when I was a kid, mostly because I really liked the Nick Cardy artwork, and I really liked. I was a kid, I couldn't articulate these things, but I liked Nick Cardy's cinematic storytelling style, and the way he would compose pages, and of course his artwork. Nick Cardy went on from comics to be a commercial, very, very popular um, and hardworking commercial artist, doing movie posters and working on really, really big ad accounts, doing some terrific illustrations. I'd love to see a Nick Cardy art book of his commercial work, because he just did some terrific stuff. I remember, I think he did one for HBO. Like it was like a poster for at the airport, and just fantastic, fantastic artist. And I knew all these characters, I was familiar with them, but even as a kid reading them, I found some of the writing a little painful, because I can't remember who was writing. Was it Gary Bates, Bob Haney, Arnold Drake, one of those guys? Oh boy, there's a bunch of fans. There's a Bob Haney fan out there. His face is turning red with anger, and I know his name. He's just shouting at me. Either it was Bob Haney or it wasn't Bob Haney. You idiot! Bob Haney never wrote that. Anyway, the stories. I imagine DC editorial saying, make these hip for young readers. It's Teen Titans. We'll get kids to read about kids their age. It's a stupid idea. But make them hip. And of course, you've got writers in their 30s and 40s. They don't know anything about hip. So some of that stuff was really, it got embarrassing. The unironic use of the word groovy, terminology and stuff that was passé, years before. Everybody talking this clever, what they thought was youthful slang. But the stories were fun. The villains were fun. And for me, it was all about the Nick Cardy artwork. I really dug it. I remember one issue as a kid, Gil Kane drew. I was pretty excited about that. I was a big Gil Kane fan. Gentle Savage. Hello, my friend. Mr. Dixon, have there ever been any heroes or villains that you found it difficult to come up with interesting character motivations for? No. No, because you got to think about that. Even if you're given a villain that didn't have clear motivations, it's my job to provide them for that story. Maybe Doctor Doom only really, really dearly wants an ice cream sundae in that story, but you got to give Doctor Doom something, to move him. Villains who are just evil for evil's sake are really boring as cardboard cutout, jerks. So, you want to make sure, they're moving. They've got something going on inside, um, rather than just, I'm going to get that guy. I don't like the way he parts his hair. I'm going to run him over with a car. But first, I got to buy a car. First, I got to get a job and make the money to buy a car. It's just the stupid people. Who wants to read that? Actually, I might. but so you got to make sure. I mean, when Graham and I were creating Bane, we wanted to make sure Bane wasn't just another, big muscle bound dude who beats the crap out of Batman. We wanted to create a character that you could relate to, that you were sympathetic to. And how can you be sympathetic to this, steroid infused monster that is Bane? And it was to have him have an even more traumatic childhood than Bruce Wayne did. And so we made Bane, as Bane professes at every opportunity, we made him an innocent. He is innocent. He didn't do anything wrong. He didn't do anything to deserve the fate to be born to serve his father's life sentence and all of the horrors that the Comics Code would not allow us to portray within the walls of Santa Prisca. And so we come up with a character, and this is why the character has legs. But this is why the character is still existent and relevant today, even way magnitudes beyond what Graham and I ever wished for the character. He's still out there punching and kicking and intimidating and scaring people all over the comic book universe, because you care about him and you, to some degree, understand him. Yes, he's a monster. Thomas Harris in the book Red Dragon, which was the first, Red Dragon. It was the first Hannibal Lecter novel. An FBI agent describes Hannibal Lecter, that he feels sorry for him. He's a figure of pity, but he says, but I'd kill the MFer in a heartbeat. I'm way paraphrasing there, but the sentiment is, yeah, I feel bad for the guy, but he's got to die. I mean, this guy's horrible. He can't be let loose in society, but yet we still relate to him. Firefly, when Graham and I wanted to bring back Firefly, who we regretfully did not rename. Firefly was just an idiotic. Garfield Lynns was just a stupid villain. Even when I was a kid, I thought he was a stupid villain. He was a Hollywood lighting guy, and he would use light effects. That was his crime, light effects. Well, in Graham and I, our iteration is he's a pyromaniac. I mean, he's a firefly. He actually sets people and things on fire. And what's his motivation? He's a pyromaniac. He's he has a psychosexual attraction to fire, which used to give Scott Peterson and Denny O'Neil the willies, because I would, allude to the fact that his fascination with fire was of a sexual nature. And often they would make changes in artwork, because I would have scenes, a few they let through. I would have scenes where Garfield Lynns would set fire to a warehouse and then stand and watch, as pyromaniacs do, as arsonists do. He would stand and watch the flames, and the flames would take the forms of beautiful women dancing. And we can only imagine what Garfield was doing while watching these. So that was his driving force, and I think that really made him a character who completely forgotten, irrelevant, awful Batman villain from the 50s. Suddenly now he was more interesting, and he stuck around, and he plays a part more in the Batman universe, in the comics. He was in the canceled Batgirl movie. He's been on the cartoon series and all the rest of it, because now, we kind of understand this guy. But unlike Bane or other characters, we don't really like this guy at all. We can't, we don't know why he is the way he is, but I think even if we found out why, we wouldn't care. Another, villain, Tad Ryerstead. Tad Ryerstead had very shallow desires. He wanted to be a hero. He wanted people to think he was a great guy. And that's a shallow desire, but there's a depth to that shallowness. I mean, he was so shallow and so stupid and irredeemable, and his goals and desires were so venal that it makes him a fascinating character. The lack of depth to this character makes Ted Ryerstead interesting. The fact that he can't even come up with an original name for himself. He just copies Nightwing's name and doesn't even spell it properly. And, so this character purposely now I did do an origin story of Nightwing, or not of this Nightwing, of Night-Wing, as a standalone. Kieran Dwyer drew it. It's one of my favorite issues. Well, every issue of Nightwing is my favorite issue. But we show why he was the way he was. But even in that story, we don't really feel a lot of sympathy for him because we're thinking, well, I wouldn't have reacted that way. As bad as that situation was, as lousy as my childhood was, I think I might have done something better or made something better of myself than this guy. But at least I understand, if not sympathize with how he was created. Now, someone like the Punisher, driven by revenge. Very simple motivations. Does he have a death wish? That's left up to question. It's one of the fascinating things about him. You never want to establish that he has a death wish. You just want to leave the impression that that could be a possibility. Or, as he says, he's just at war. And if he dies in the war, he's willing to accept that. Doesn't want to die because if he dies, he can't go on killing criminal scumbags. But that's his motivation, and it's a clean motivation. It's a revenge motivation. It's a way too common motivation. I love the Punisher. I think the Punisher is an extremely nuanced character, and I'm glad the Punisher is created. But there's an awful lot of stories about revenge. He killed my ma, he killed my pa. It's the kind of thing I tried to avoid when I wrote Levon Cade, was that kind of simple motivation of revenge. There's more to Levon Cade. There's nothing about revenge in Levon Cade. He's not motivated by that. He's motivated by, basically there's some things a man can't walk around. And then he doesn't walk around it, and then he gets in all kinds of trouble. And that trouble, of course, leads to his family. And then he's got to work to protect his family, be that, kill everybody or go on the run. And those are Levon Cade's motivations, far different from what drives the Punisher. Superman's motivations, as I said before, is to be seen as human, to be a welcome member of the human race, even though he is not. And then you get the really enigmatic characters like Snake Eyes. And we're never going to know a whole lot about what drives Snake Eyes because he doesn't talk. And even if he did talk, he probably wouldn't tell you much. But his desires are obviously to serve in the G.I. Joes and serve, to my mind, in a capacity where he sees himself the way a sniper sees himself, stealthy, secretive, often working alone. And their main goal is to save the lives of their fellow soldiers, to act as a force multiplier. Snake Eyes is very much a force multiplier for the G.I. Joes. Yeah, he's worth 25 Joes. And that's the way a sniper works. A sniper works long distance to kill the enemy, often to kill enemy that the troops on the ground cannot see, that they would be victims of were the sniper not in place to take them down. So I see that. I mean, Larry Hama's never said this, anything else. I just, in my head, in my version of Snake Eyes, this is who he is. He's a lifesaver, not a life taker, even though he takes a whole lot of lives. Twin Spin. All right, Gentle Savage is back. Also, when it comes to writing villains, do you have any advice for giving them interesting, evil plans? Man, that's the tough one. That's the tough one. Goldfinger. To me, Goldfinger is the high bar for bad guys with evil plans. Even when I was a kid and saw Goldfinger at the theater, I went, that is so cool. He wants to get into Fort Knox, not to steal the gold, but to irradiate it because he loves only gold. And he's stockpiled. He's cornered the market on gold. And he wants to irradiate all the gold in Fort Knox to drive up the per ounce value, the troy ounce value of the gold he already owns. He's not going to steal it. He's not going to steal the gold. He's going to make sure no one else can have it so that what he already owns is worth more. I mean, That's absolute genius. Absolute genius. And his motivations, we were talking about motivations before, are clear. This guy is sex mad for gold. He's just nuts. His name is Auric, which is, Greek for gold, Goldfinger. We got to imagine he changed his name. And as Shirley Bassey informs us, he loves only gold. But isn't this brilliant? And every time I think of a heist or a bad guy scenario or whatever, I think Goldfinger. Goldfinger. I've never surpassed it, never gotten close to anything that clever. But it's like, it's got to be, I got to at least shoot for the moon and try to make my bad guy plot as interesting and innovative and different and just plain cool as Goldfinger's was. And, I do this stuff all the time. And there's a few that like I've held back. There's one I'm absolutely dying to do. Vox Day and I kid about it all the time. He says, well, maybe now you can get to that story. And I'm not going to tell you what it is because someone will steal it for absolute certainty. Some Nimrod at Marvel or DC who might be listening, or I might have a friend who's listening. Just take this idea. But I've always wanted to do it, and I've never gotten to the point in any of the continuities that I've worked in to get to this, huge event that would be a bad guy's dream plot against humanity or whatever. But Goldfinger, man, wow. I'm still in awe. Triple spin. Woohoo! General Savage, again, he asked, do you find it easier to write younger or older characters? As a fiction writer, you're like an actor. You got to get into the head. You got to get into the personality of whatever you're writing. So, as I said before, writing young characters, I kind of, made my name writing female characters. I'm not a female. And writing young characters. I wasn't young at the time. But you kind of just put yourself in their place. And as I said before, if you're writing young characters, don't write current slang or anything else in an attempt to make them sound contemporary. Just let them talk like normal people. Maybe a little looser in their, given their personality, maybe a little more humor in their responses, or less attention paid to grammar, a lower vocabulary level, maybe. There's a difference between way young, well, not so much anymore, thanks to our public education system, but there's a difference between the way young people talk and the way older people talk. At least there should be. You should, as you age, get more syntax and complexity into the way you talk. Like talking in complete sentences, possibly even compound sentences, like I just made this one, and proper, proper terminology, because I see so many people, not just young people, they talk like they text. It's simple declarative sentences with a lot of the words mispronounced. Like the way people say important now. Important is not important. Say the whole word. Anyway, another tangent, but it's my show, and you say you love these tangents. So, but it was my experience on Airboy, writing Airboy, writing a young person, that got me the job writing Robin. So they must have seen something they liked, and I wasn't writing cringeworthy youthful dialogue. I didn't have, Airboy saying radical and tubular, which were popular. Well, which I assumed as a 32-year-old man were popular with the kids at the time, because I heard them on MTV, which meant that they weren't popular with the kids anymore. But writing, grown-up characters, because hopefully I'm sort of a grown-up. It's just it's not a matter of difficulty. It's just a matter of immersing yourself into that character and trying to get it right. So, so there you have it. What did I do there? Hold on. I have screwed up somewhere. Yes. New question. McCran Comics. This is a long one, folks. So I will be narrating. From what I gather, the original Barbara Gordon version of Batgirl was cooked up between Julie Schwartz, Gardner Fox, and Carmen Infantino at the behest of TV producer William Dozier in order to introduce a character into the comic ahead of the appearance of the Adam West Batman show. The motivation to add Batgirl to the series was to add sex appeal to season 3 in an effort to recover from the show's decline. In the comic and in Yvonne Craig's portrayal, the implication seemed to be that she would be more interested in the Dark Knight rather than the Boy Wonder. Barbara was an adult while Dick was still a teenager. She had a career as a librarian and later congresswoman. She had a steady relationship with ex-cop Jason Bard. Meanwhile, Dick Grayson became Nightwing, got engaged to Teen Titans teammate Starfire. In between these developments, some flirtation between Dick and Babs was toyed around with, which, in an interview with 13th Dimension writer Bob Rozakis, called sort of a one-sided hots for teacher thing on younger Robin's part that wasn't taken seriously and came to a resolution. My understanding is that Denny O'Neil fought Teen Titans editorial to get Dick Grayson back under the control of the Bat offices, which is what terminated the Nightwing and Starfire relationship. I imagine this is merely because he viewed Nightwing as a Batman character and not specifically for that reason, though I also understand that O'Neil generally wasn't too fond of crossing over into the larger DC universe, which wasn't specific to that particular development. Please do correct me if I'm wrong with anything I've said here about Denny O'Neil. He continues, this guy's a scholar. I appreciate that. Scott Beatty wrote a blog post about taking Batgirl Year One as an opportunity to shamelessly show what he wanted to see in Bob Rozakis' Batman family run as a fanboy. Dick and Babs actually getting together. You co-wrote Batgirl Year One with him, as well as writing Birds of Prey number 8, both of which depict what he calls wish fulfillment for a fanboy turned creator of Dick carrying the torch for Barbara. Okay. My question is, do you share that sentiment? Gets to a question. Question arises. Do you share that sentiment? Was this truly the entire motivation of the romantic pairing of Dick and Babs? Was there something from Denny O'Neil or other editorials that played a part in this, since there was an element of different continuity at play? Other Barbara Gordon retcons include her parentage and Commissioner Gordon's knowledge of her secret, so she was definitely being tinkered with overall. Yeah, okay, first of all, yes, Batgirl was created at the request of the TV producers. They wanted to introduce the Batgirl into season 3, pump up the ratings, and my understanding is that Gardner Fox and Julie Schwartz weren't given a lot of time. They sprung this on them last minute. And you can tell if you read the first appearance of Batgirl, it's sort of a rushed deal. They cram a lot into that story. And the other evidence, I think, that proves that it was a rushed deal is in the backup story featuring Elongated Man, which was a recurring backup feature in Detective at the time. The Dibneys go to a costume party, and that was like central to the story. And in the Batgirl origin, she also goes to a costume party. And I think that's evidence that the story had to be written quickly because Gardner Fox just went with, the idea he'd already used. It was in his costume parties were in his head, and he thought, well, I'll just use that gag here in this story too. And but the cool thing about it for me is when Scott Beatty and I wrote Batgirl Year One, we both had things we wanted to put in there, continuity stuff. And my main one was I want to show that Barbara Gordon and the Dibneys were at the same costume party. So in that issue, we don't see it, but we do in Batgirl Year One that she was at the same, she was at that same party. So now, as far as the relationship between her and Dick, first of all, by the time of the Batman family, we have Dick going off to college, which means he's at least 17 or 18. And if Barbara is about 5 years older than him, that makes her, 23, 22 or 23. the difference in their ages becomes less important. And then obviously, as he becomes a grown man and he's moving closer to his 30s, I assume in Nightwing he's in his mid-20s, maybe Barbara's 29. That difference doesn't make any difference now. They're both young people in their 20s, so it's not skeevy or anything like that. And I never saw it as a hot for teacher thing. I saw it as propinquity. There's a new word for you. I know why I don't use this word very often. It's hard to say. Propinquity is a word for two people who are in close proximity to each other for a degree of time before they realize they have feelings for each other. The feelings grow out of familiarity as they learn more and more about each other. And who better to fall for one another than Dick Grayson and Barbara Gordon? They have something in common that very few people do. They are members of the Batman family. There's not a lot of them. So of course they would be drawn to each other, first in comradeship and friendship, and then possibly something romantic. And who wouldn't fall for Barbara Gordon? And also, as I said before, for a romance to work, we have to love both characters. So this was low-hanging fruit, my friend, my friends, because we already love these characters. Everybody loved Dick Grayson, and we love Barbara Gordon, and we, most readers really love seeing them together. And I thought, it's doomed from the start, but I want to play with it. And it wasn't editorially directed. No one told me to do this. It's just I was writing a lot of Batman, and I was, inadvertently, no plan of my own, kind of a driver of continuity between all of these characters, establishing their relationships and things like that. And I really wanted to play with this. And now Scott Beatty says, it's a fanboy wish fulfillment thing, and I'm glad he could play a part, and he played a brilliant part in it. Batgirl Year One would not have been what it was without his contributions. We had an amazing time working on that series, and but because I was like central to the Batman universe, I was allowed free reign, almost carte blanche to flesh this stuff out. And I enjoyed it, and readers responded to it. I mean, Birds of Prey #8 sold out so quickly. I never understand why they didn't go back to press on that. They really should have gone back to press with like another 40,000 issues for that issue, because it became instantly collectible. Because the print one, it wasn't a low print run. Back the Birds of Prey was selling well at the time, but it demand exceeded supply as word got around about what that issue was about. And so, yeah, and then everything he said about Denny O'Neil's true. Denny O'Neil bitterly opposed Dick Grayson being in the Teen Titans world, that Dick Grayson had to return to the Batman offices. And he worked a long time. I'm going to say a year or more at editorial meetings and meeting with Paul Levitz and making his case, an excellent case, that Dick Grayson needed to stop, flying to other planets and fighting robots and come back, because Denny had a loathing for mixing Batman characters with science fiction like you wouldn't believe. He hated Clayface and Mr. Freeze and Man-Bat and all the science fiction-y Batman villains, despised them. So he really wanted to free Dick Grayson from Teen Titans jail as he saw it and bring him back into the Batman fold. And obviously, from a commercial standpoint, it was the wisest decision, because Teen Titans could be popular on its own without him. And he was such a huge success in his solo book and his return. And I think also it aided because the animated people wanted him back in the Batman fold as well. And that might have been the deciding factor. I can't say, because I wasn't there, wasn't in those meetings. But now that I think about it, I've never really thought about this before. I like how this show makes me think about these answers. And this is proof that these are on the spot. I don't rehearse or write any answers out for these things. um, it may very well be that the cartoon people at Warner's Animation were the ones that were the deciding factor. And I'm betting Denny spoke to Paul Dini and Bruce Timm, said, "Could you come in on my side on this one?" I don't know. Denny was a shrewd dude, and I bet he might have enlisted their aid in doing this. It wouldn't be the first time these kind of things happened. I mean, Tim Drake's Robin outfit, we was shown to everybody. We had like 16 different variations, and we went with the one Tim Burton liked. so the Hollywood people, the animation people, the movie people, they trump the comic book decision. So maybe that's the true secret story, the untold story of how Dick Grayson left the Teen Titans and returned to Gotham. Who knows? We'll probably never know. If I ever talk to Paul Dini again, if I ever have an opportunity to speak to him, maybe I'll ask him, did Denny reach out and ask for help? Okay, Bruno Bookstore at gmail.com. If you've got a lengthy tome, a question that takes 6 pages, 6 screens to answer, bring it on. Obviously, I enjoyed that last one. Thank you so much for that. Very thoughtful. All of your questions today were thoughtful. I hope my answers were up to snuff, equal to your ponderings. And so that's about it. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching and subscribing and visiting me for this, epic length edition of Ask Chuck Dixon. And I will see all of you, I hope, down the road. And don't forget, there's a drive time coming up on Friday.